Northumberland Public Library presents Continuing the Conversation.
Well, we're going to get started, and I'm going to introduce myself. I am Jane Blue. I'm the library director here. And the reason that we wanted to do this today was to have a conversation about why voting is so important, especially in Northumberland County. We see a great turnout, according to Joe, for our presidential elections. We see a horrible turnout for our local elections, and we'd like to change that because local elections are so very important, and that's what we have coming up in November. So you are a panel, and I have a list of questions for you that we're going to talk about, and not all of them are directed towards you, but if you would take a minute first when we get started and introduce yourself and tell us what you do, that will be great. And I'm going to defer to the only lady on the panel and have her go first.
I'm Betty Christopher. I'm chairman of the school board, and I'm a long-term teacher in this county, and I am a graduate of Northumberland High School.
Mr. Tomlin?
Tommy Tomlin, member of the Board of Supervisors. My full-time job is I'm the probation supervisor at the Department of Juvenile Justice. And when I got nothing else to do, I run rescue squads. I'm captain of the Northumberland County Rescue Squad. And I'm also a graduate of Northumberland High School, and Betty was my teacher for the best class in high school. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Mr. Austin?
Okay. There we go. I'm Austin Schmidt. I'm the chairman of the County Electoral Board, and I'm a retired soldier. And I escaped from Fairfax 7 years ago, and I love it here.
I'm Joe Schrader. I'm the secretary of the County Electoral Board and have been for about 10 years now. My wife Rose and I moved here 14 years ago. I'm also retired military. I served 28 years in the Army, and we retired. And we have done a lot of volunteer work around the community since we've been here, but just glad to be here representing the electoral board.
And online we have Denzel Mitchell. Denzel, if you would introduce yourself.
I'm Denzel Mitchell. I was raised in Northumberland County, but I wasn't born there because there wasn't a hospital that could deliver babies. So I went to Northumberland, all through the Northumberland school system, and now I'm at the University of Virginia. I'm a fourth year or senior here at the University of Virginia studying politics and economics.
And hopefully you'll come back here when you're done.
Yeah, that's the plan in some way.
And run for office.
That's right. So we're going to start out today talking a little bit about the particulars of voting. And I'm going to defer to Joe for this question. And Austin, if you would answer as well. Tell people a little bit about how do you register to vote, and can you register today, and why it's so important to register to vote.
Well, you can register to vote in several different ways. The State Department of Elections has voter registration on their website. You can actually go on the Department of Election website and register to vote. When you do that, that information comes down to your local voter registrar, who will then complete the registration for you. Can you register today? Well, how else can you register? You can go by the registrar's office and fill out the paperwork and register there. And I brought some registration applications with me in case there's anybody who wants to register. So yes, you can register today either online or in person here. There is a deadline. Virginia does not have same-day registration. In other words, you can't register on election day. And the deadline is usually about 10-15 days before the election. In fact, the deadline is October the 12th. If you are not registered to vote and you want to vote in November, you have to register before October the 12th.
And I should go back and let you all know that this is being recorded, and we will share this online through the library website. So if anybody could not be here today but wants to learn more about this, they're able to access that recording. So who is running for election in November? Austin?
Goodness gracious, we've got a whole slate of folks running for election in November. I know that we're going to have the election of the state delegates to Richmond. So that would be the Right Reverend Blizzard is running, and Margaret Ransom is running for the House District seat. And of course, let me see here.
Governor, Lieutenant Governor.
That's right, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and Attorney General. So those folks are running.
Senate? Whitman?
House of Representatives.
It's an odd year.
It's next year.
Next year for Mr. Whitman will run again, but that's next year, so.
And then we do have supervisors.
Supervisors.
School board?
And 2 school board.
And 2 school board members, 2 supervisors, and 2 school.
That's District 2 and 3.
Okay.
Because
District
we're
2.
staggered.
Right, which I think is smart. And 2 school board.
So a lot of local, representatives to various boards and positions right here in the county, as well as in Richmond. So it's very significant that folks vote, because my attitude is if you don't vote, you can't complain.
That's right. So Joe, do I have to go to the polling place to vote, or can I vote early? Can I mail in my vote? How does that work?
You do not have to go to your polling place to vote. Virginia has early voting that starts 45 days before the election. So the election is November the 2nd. We started early voting a week ago on September the 17th. And the early voting is at the registrar's office. Let me take this mask off, maybe you can hear me a little better. The early voting is at the registrar's office, which is near the old courthouse. It's in the old veterinarian's office across the street from the bank in Heathsville. So you can go by there and vote Monday through Friday from 9 until 4. You can vote by mail. We have absentee voting. You have to apply, and you would say, why would anybody want to vote absentee? We get a lot of applications from people who are in nursing homes, who are basically housebound and can't get out. If you are not going to be here on election day, you apply for an absentee ballot, and we will mail to you all the material you need to vote by mail. So you have 3 choices. You can vote early at the registrar's office, you can vote absentee by mail, and you can also go vote at your normal polling place on election day.
Can you vote early at every election?
Yes, early voting is done for every single election.
So I'd like to pose this to Mr. Tomlin, and then we'll work our way down. Tell us in your thoughts why local and state elections are so important.
Well, just like Austin said, if you don't vote, you can't complain, although you know you have a right to speech. It is a chance for people to be involved, because one, if a candidate actually talks to people face to face or by some means, they can find out what people think and what they want and what they don't want. You can find that out too. So it's a way for them to have a voice. They may not agree with you, but you have a chance to find out what they want. Just, being up on the ivory tower type campaigning, you don't have as much chance to really get a quote unquote feel for the people, how they're involved. And sometimes you see some interesting discussions.
Okay. Ms. Christopher?
Same question?
Mm-hmm.
And voting in for local and state elections is very important to me, because I can express my personal opinions just like everybody else can.
Mr. Schmidt?
It's important because the local representatives, the folks who know the folks here, are your best resource for, once again, making sure your voice is heard in this grassroots political situation. And if you're not voting in the local elections, your opinion is not being sent to the next level, because the local officials talk to the next level up, and they talk to the next level up, and it's a food chain, if you will, all the way to the top. And they do pay attention to what the voters are saying, and so you get your hits in here at the local level, so that people at the next level up and the next level up are aware of local concerns, because if you're not voting for the people down here who know that Route 360 needs resurfacing, you know, in Burgess, then the folks in Richmond don't know, and they can't budget properly. And then there are federal highway funds available, and this is just one example, there are many. But the folks at the federal level have highway funds that are available to do this sort of thing. And then it all goes eventually into the national budget. And everybody up the chain, from the voter down here in the county, becomes aware of the situation. And believe me, politicians like to keep the voters happy.
I tell people it's important to pay attention to your local and state elections, because everybody gets cranked up about president, vice president, Senate, House of Representatives. And it is true that decisions that are made in Washington affect us here. But the decisions that Mr. Tomlin and Ms. Christopher make affect us right now immediately. For example, the Board of Supervisors sets the property tax rate. So if you're not happy with the property tax rate, you need to talk to Mr. Tomlin. If you want to put a dock on your property, you have to be approved by the local board, and then it comes up to the supervisors. And if you look at the supervisor's agenda, every time they meet, they're approving a zoning change or a dock or something of that sort. The school board approves the budget. What are the teachers going to get paid? And if you're not paying your teachers much, they're going to all go somewhere else. The school board oversees the curriculum and various things. So the local people, the school board and the supervisors, directly affect your life every day. And then if you, as Mr. Schmidt says, if you move up one step to the state folks set the state tax levels, they set the speed limits, they set all kinds of things that affect you every day. So that's why you really need to pay attention to your local representatives.
Jane, could I add one thing?
Sure.
Obviously, because obviously our election officials know very well, since they have to do it every year. We have elections in Virginia every year. And if you get in the practice of voting in your local elections, you will remember that your election day, you're going to have an election day every year, the first Tuesday after the first Monday. So if you get into practice, otherwise you might forget about the day to vote on. So it's good to establish the practice.
That's right, that's right. Denzel, what are your thoughts on voting in local and state elections? Why is it so important?
Well, it's important because they're actually the most important elections. They're the most important elections because when you look at the grand scheme of how much your vote counts in a presidential election or even a statewide election, since there's a smaller populace and you're voting in your district, your House of Delegates district, or you're voting in your local county district, then your vote actually counts a little bit more. You have more of a chance to actually swing an election just because you're voting within a smaller pool. But not only that, but because the things that the board does, the local board, school board, board of supervisors, and state delegates do, they touch you more because they're more focused on you and they're meant to represent you. So like all the things that have been mentioned, of course, they decide the taxes and they decide the budget. But if you look at this past year, the board of supervisors was the entity that wrote the proposal to get a grant to get broadband internet and to expand broadband internet through the Virginia Telecommunications Act. If you want to look at why the state level was important. In order to approve those funds, our state representatives have to vote in favor of approving the budgeting to give money to the Virginia Telecommunications Act. If you look at this past year with the coronavirus, we got a lot of state and local governments got federal money, but when they decided how that money was going to be parsed up, who was going to be helped with that money, it was on the state level, our delegates who decided how that money was going to be spent. And then on the local level, the local funds that we received, it was Supervisor Tomlin and the other supervisors who decided how that money was going to be spent to make sure that our county was able to reap all the benefits of the federal funds and get out of the coronavirus pandemic, the economic situation that we're in. So it's important because the way the government in America works is that a lot of big decisions are made at higher levels, but when it comes to how those decisions are implemented and how they affect you, it's your local representatives and your state representatives who ultimately decide how those policies are going to be implemented on the ground. And as other people have mentioned, you have their ear a little bit more than you have the ear of the President of the United States or your senator or congressman.
Thank you. And so the recurring theme I hear from everybody is that it's a trickle-down effect. So if we don't vote locally, we can't make change, and that goes all the way to the top. So how can I figure out who I should vote for? I'm going to open this up to anyone who would like to comment.
I'll take the first day, but
All right.
been doing it longer. Obviously, for those, the local elections in the smaller counties like we're in, you can actually, if you devote enough time, you can go door to door and see every registered voter, or every person for that matter. But given that we have a large number of people who are summertime residents or not living here full time, I can be honest with you, I look at the registered voters list in terms of who's registered, and I knock on those doors. And that's one way. Obviously, you do advertising in the papers or online if you have it. Any other ways, but being seen and making yourself available in that regards, because makes a lot of people like to at least see who they might be voting for. If you're an invisible person, then as a candidate, how might they think of yourself as a elected official?
Anyone else like to comment?
Well, I'll speak off what Tommy was talking about, local and knocking on doors. I'll give you one example. One of the times that I was going around, people in my district knocking on doors, because a lot of them I did not know, and of course they did not know me. And I had a little paper about me, I gave a brochure and I introduced myself. I didn't stay long, but I told them what I was doing and all. And I just said, well, I'd appreciate election day if you would vote for me. And then so I left. Well, one day I was at the polls on election day, and this little lady came up to me and she said, you know, you're the only one that's ever come to my house and said, I like that and I'm going to vote for you. So it does make a difference. When you go and knock on doors, I know it is time consuming and all, but it does make a difference.
So one-on-one contact is very important. Well, our next question actually kind of, go ahead, Denzel.
Your question was, how should I figure out who to vote for?
Yeah. How do I figure out who to vote for?
Well, one thing you can look at aside from the specific policies is how someone runs their campaign. Depending on how they run their campaign is exactly how they're going to be in office. So if they're going on knocking on doors and if they're engaging with the community in their campaign, you can pretty much expect the same thing from them once they actually serve. Now, if they're not, and you don't see them knocking on your door and you don't see them at public events, you don't see them really vying for your vote, then you can pretty much expect once they get in office, they're going to do the same thing. So look at how a campaign runs their campaign and you can see how that candidate will be in office. The other thing is that you should take time and look at whether it's in the paper or through your own personal experiences to see on the local level, in the county and within your region of the Northern Neck, what are the things that you're concerned about, because it's not always going to be related to the federal level policies. There's a lot of debate now about things that are happening on the federal level that are important, of course, like infrastructure and abortion. But there's things on the state and local level that are going to affect you a little bit more, that these representatives are going to have more power over. They don't have a vote in the Senate, they don't have a vote in the House of Representatives, but they do have a vote in the local level when it comes to school funding, when it comes to broadband internet expansion, when it comes to utilities and making sure that we have water in the county 50 years from now, because of the depletion of the Potomac Aquifer, which is where most people in this county get their water, is a huge issue. And when you look at funding for policing, that's a concern with many people. All that happens on the local level. So whether you're concerned that police aren't getting enough funding or they're getting too much, that's something that you should look at how you feel about that, and look at how the candidates stand on those issues, and then you can pretty much figure out who you should support.
Okay. Hold on, I was just making the note. I heard you talk about the fact that when we meet candidates face to face, rather than relying on ads, that's really important, and considering their public forums. What are some ways in this county that we might get people a little more interested in our local elections?
I'll go ahead and start. Obviously, as others have mentioned, we do have, the county is finally, during the 20th, 21st century, do have stuff, our meetings now online. The pandemic made that, but we also have Facebook. But we, as government officials, need to make information out there available for people to, one, know what's going on, so that they also can question it. Obviously, the coverage in the local papers, without naming names, is a little bit sporadic, to put it mildly. But again, if generally the way people are is everything is going fine in their mind, they're not going to come at it. You don't see many people, you're doing a good job, or we like things are going. It's usually when they're in favor of something, but especially when they're opposed to something. You get more people involved in opposition generally than you do in favor. But, and again, at local level, it can be dependent upon the issue of the day. It could be a land use issue that could rile up the community, or obviously even in tax season, you don't see a big number of people. It's when everybody is generally, quote unquote, happy with the status quo, they're not coming in. And that's really going to be the same at any level, but especially at the local level. Their issues are, as has been mentioned, a little bit, quote unquote, more everyday, more mundane. And so it's sometimes challenging. It's when you have a participation by the citizens, you have a better idea of what they want. The bottom line is to generally do what they want, and that's always the challenge. But sometimes we don't have competing ideas. We don't have ideas, period. Other than that we ourselves bring up, and people can argue over that.
Anybody else?
I think.
Excuse me. Go ahead, Denzel.
Go ahead, Denzel.
Okay, I didn't know. Yeah, I think a big thing is that you got to look at what it is that people's media sources are, and what it is that their media sources are discussing. So, if you're someone who reads the paper, and you don't see much about updates on the recent or upcoming elections, or what certain campaigns have done, then you're probably less likely to be engaged in the upcoming election, or engaged in keeping track of the campaigns. Once those persons get into office, if there's not a lot of discussion about some things that are going on, or you're not reading about them, at least, like you're not reading the paper at all, you're not being informed, then you're less likely to be engaged in holding those your representatives accountable. And so this goes both ways. my last point was important because it emphasizes that people need to figure out what's important to them. So if you're going to spend time, your free time doing something that you care about, it would be a good idea to stay informed, at least about your local news, and to every once in a while check through the local paper, either physically or online. It would be a good idea to go, if you have a free afternoon, to go to a supervisors meeting, for the Board of Supervisors meeting, or for the school board meeting. So it goes both ways, where, yeah, we could see, a representative could always do more. Local media structure could always do more. But in reality, like many things in life, if you don't make the effort, it's not going to come to you. And so if you care about things like, as I mentioned continually, because it's a big problem, care about whether or not you or your family member has access to broadband, if you care about the housing in the area, how affordable it is for middle-class younger people who are trying to move in, if you care about policing, if you care about public access, like public boat landings, there's a new one opening up, then you need to make the effort to be engaged in those conversations, because if you're not, there's very little chance that your opinions and your concerns are going to be heard. So it's really incumbent on the constituents to find the time to really emphasize the things they care about.
Thank you. Mr. Sleep?
One of the things, of course, that we face here in Northumberland County is that we have only 9,600 registered voters. Fairfax County has 740,000 registered voters. That's 750,000. So the candidates on the state level and federal level are going to go where the votes are. And so we rarely see federal or state candidates down here. We see our local candidates all the time. We see our school board and supervisor and sheriff in the grocery store and the hardware store, and I can tell you from personal experience that they are willing to stop and talk to you. I've buttonholed supervisors from time to time, and they really will stand there and listen to you, and you'll have a two-way conversation. Back in, I want to say it was 2015, we had a candidate forum in the high school auditorium, drew about 250 people, and we had our sheriff and school board and supervisor candidates. We invited the candidates for delegate, and they were not able to attend. So one of the problems that I see is we can have a lot of contact with our local candidates, but when you get up to the state and especially the federal level, they tend to go where the votes are, and they sort of overlook us folks. At least that's how I feel about it. You can look, all the advertising you see on TV, of course, is sponsored by the candidates, and they're going to tell you what a great person they are, and they're going to say the opposite about their opposition. But most of your regional newspapers, the Times Dispatch, the newspapers up in Northern Virginia, will have at least a month or so before Election Day, most of them will have a spread where they have questions, and each candidate responds to those. And you can get some idea of what the candidates say about certain issues if you look at at least your regional and sometimes your local papers. There are candidate forums, but one problem is they're not all that well advertised. I don't know how many people are aware of the fact that there was a debate between the two candidates for governor about 10 days ago at, I think, near Washington over in Fredericksburg. And they have another one scheduled, and I believe it's up in Northern Virginia. It may be up in George Mason, I'm not sure. But in order to get up to the state and federal level and see what the candidates are thinking about, it does take some work on the voters' part, which I think is kind of a shame, but that's the reality that we live with.
May I say something?
Sure.
This all begins at home. when I say home, I mean our county, our little towns, our cities, to get people involved as adults, you get them involved as children. You have the people who are running for office come and visit the school and sit up there on that stage and take questions from every little kid who wants to ask something. And take them seriously, because if they're busy, want to know, they're asking the question. Well, then when they get to high school, it should be part of the curriculum that high school students get involved in the local elections. I know we did it when I was in high school. We chose clusters, a working cluster, and you had a candidate that you had to research, you had to go and talk to that person, you scheduled events with them, and they would come to the high school or to a classroom. Now let me tell you, when a candidate comes to a classroom, it makes a whole different impression on what kind of a person that is. And I remember mailing some letters for one of our candidates when we first arrived here, and I didn't know that person very well, but I got involved immediately. If my children had still been in school, I would have expected them to come home at night asking me questions about what's going on in my county or in my school, since they make determinations for where funds go in the school. So it starts at home. And if we're not willing to set up a program starting with our children, and you know, Eagle Scouts, they are a perfect example of ones who get involved. But there are not enough Eagle Scouts, so we need to get some children in a program and get young workers. I know Joy and them have helped do that by having volunteers at the polls. The students come from the high school to work on the election day. And so once they get that little bit of an appetite for what this is all about, they get so excited, and then they go out, they're going off to college, but they can come home and vote. So it's up to us to get that foundation set so that it can rise right through, and they become a voting member of our community.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody, any further comments?
I'll add to the getting involved in the home. That's actually how I got started. My father had Joe's position, Secretary of the Electoral Board. And in the 4th grade, I was a little geek. I had the little blocks drawn and candidates and the numbers. I'd be so happy the next day after the election. Nobody else cared about it, but I did. And of course, I found it later on. My grandfather, he was sheriff of the county. So it started in the home, and I just continued on. When I was in college, I haven't missed an election yet since I was eligible to vote. Because if I was not, it was at college, I did the absentee ballot. And that's just, it's part of what the two gentlemen who served their country, thank you. They gave us the right to vote.
I have a receipt at home that was issued by Northumberland County to my grandmother, in which she paid $1.50 to vote. Poll tax. I also have that same time, and I've forgotten the date because it's been a while since I've looked at it. It's she paid another $1.50 for the, what was it, prohibition, tax, and in other words, the alcohol. She had paid another $1.50 to be able to vote on that. So I have both of those receipts at home. In fact, I have them in my safe deposit box because I value them so much. You know.
Yep.
You know, I grew up in a house that read newspapers.
Me too.
My daddy did not allow us to touch the paper until he had read it.
Oh.
And then we spread it out and we read it. We also had little magazines that came. And unfortunately, about 15 years, 20 years ago, I began to see that there were students in my classrooms who did not get a newspaper, who did not get a national magazine that had news in it. They didn't watch the news programs on television. And I would ask them a question, and they didn't even know who I was talking about. And I said, we have to stop this. We have to get them started reading, so I made a requirement each week. They had to choose an article from the paper that, it could be a local issue, it could be a national issue, it could be an international issue, but it could touch their lives. And you gotta start that sometime.
We had a current events class.
Yes.
That's what we had. We had
Current
to
events.
pick an article every week and write a paragraph about that. You know, and I don't think they do that anymore in school. Do they do that in school, Denzel?
No, we don't. The only time we're engaged with news articles is in English class, and
Okay.
so when you take English, you have research papers, and that, at least in my class, my teacher, we did research papers on recent events, current events. So in English class, you do engage, but it's only if you're in that class. And the reason I got involved in local politics here was, well, one, of course, I grew up in a house where we did, we watched the news a lot, especially the world news. And also, I was fortunate enough to be a volunteer for a candidate when I was a junior in high school. And that just goes to say that you can volunteer for both of these House of Delegate candidates right now. One candidate is Linwood Blizzard, someone who I work for. He's running for the House of Delegates against the incumbent Margaret Ranson. And from my understanding, she also has campaign volunteers. So if you're someone who wants to learn about elections, Reverend Blizzard not only has a volunteer program, but he has a fellowship program where you can be paid as a student to work on his campaign. So there are opportunities out there. I know it's very hard to learn about them just because, we're a small town and it's not always easy to pass information. In some ways it is easy because you know everyone, but in other ways it's hard to pass around information. But there's opportunities there to volunteer with the candidates. There's opportunities there, as y'all talked about, to learn about what's going on in the county. It just takes the initiative for either young people or people in general to learn, or for the people who are their friends or mentors to encourage them to learn and get involved in these processes, because as we've talked about already, they're really important. So it takes a little bit of a push on the side of on the constituent to actually get out there and engage, because that's how you get involved in anything in life, not just politics. If you want to do something, you got to make an initiative to do it. And you got to have the people around you who are going to support you in doing so.
Right, that's true. So let's talk about redistricting. How will that affect Northumberland County, and how will it affect the local areas, and when will it happen? My understanding is the election in November is based on the current district, but once the redistricting happens, how's that going to affect us here in Northumberland County?
It'll affect us both state and locally.
Okay.
Right now, they're with Virginia citizens affirming the redistricting commission. If you read the papers, then you will know that they're redistricting the House of Delegates and the state Senate districts right now. To give an example how redistricting impacted on us, for 60 plus years, and that's as far as I went back, the northern neck, including the four counties of all the traditional four counties of the northern neck, were all part of the 28th senatorial district. In 2010, Westmoreland got split, with the 28th going that way, and thus us being part of the 4th. Senator McDougal, who's out of Hanover, as Joe was saying, when you have compact contiguity of interest, we lost that when that split. Now, Senator McDougal does have a summer cottage down Lewis South, so he's familiar with the area, but still, we've gone back with Richard Stewart, Senator Chichester, to Paul Mann. I didn't go past him, but I remember all those senators. That's where at the state level the redistricting impacted us. And they do have Republican and Democrat plans right now that the commission is meeting to draw. I think Monday, as I read today, they are working on the plans to come closer. If they don't agree upon it, then it will go to the Virginia Supreme Court, and then we've got judges doing it. Obviously, it will all, for the state level, it'll be straight for the 2023 House and Senate races. Locally, it will not impact this year, obviously, because we didn't get our census figures, the gross figures, until August. The figures per census is 11,839. So we lost by the census 491 people. Last time, 2010, we lost 79 people when we had to readjust boundaries because under the Baker versus Carr, the U.S. Supreme Court, one man, one vote, they're supposed to be equal. Using the math, an ideal district would be 2367.8 or 2368. Well, to give an example, I looked at the August registration statistics that Joe's department's involved with in Austin. Right now in District 4, my district and Betty's district, we have 2,246 active registrants, 95 inactive, for a total of 2341. So that gives you, we're within 18 people of having an ideal right there. That does not include those who are not registered and having knocked on many a door, or not knocked on a lot of doors that I went by who were not registered. And when I was knocking on doors, I was prepared to give, like Joe said, the application, the registration note, and that does not include the number of kids, those under the age of 18 who cannot eligible, and unfortunately those who are convicted and have a felony conviction can't vote. So obviously I can say at least District 4 right now, barring a major miracle, will have to be boundaries readjusted. And in 2010, District 4 lost, we used to go down part of Fairport Road, down Waste Creek, but now it only goes to Brickyard Road. So there will be some boundary line adjustments. District 5, potentially, and then District 3 at Borderman. So, and then in 2010, we were on the Voting Rights Act Section 5 pre-clearance, which we had to go to the U.S. Department of Justice to be pre-cleared, make sure it met all their criteria. Well, under the Shelby County versus Holder case, that's no longer required. But Virginia this year just passed Virginia pre-clearance. So now once we come up with plans to redistrict, then it's got to go to the Attorney General's office, and we have no idea how they're going to, we don't have any track record of that.
So this is all new.
This is all new. Now, the way we normally do it is obviously we appoint somebody from a district to be a redistricting committee, so to speak, who looks at the figures, looked at the maps. Because you can, once you get it down to the actual districts and down to the block, you can actually take on a computer and move people around. And that's some of the things we did last time in looking at adjusting it. But that's what they will do first, then it'll come, then we will come to, it'll come to the Board of Supervisors. There will be a public hearing for public input. Then once we approve it, then it will have to go again to the Attorney General's office for pre-clearance. And those maps, obviously, sometimes are very interesting to figure out what they go. It's always best to have roads and bodies of water, but sometimes when you go through a middle of the field, you don't know where it is. And actually, there's one person who's in District 4 who, to get to him, you actually literally got to go into Lancaster County, Kilmar, and come back around. So it will impact us this year, there's no question, because I cannot see any way we're not going to have a readjustment in District 4.
So that will affect our elections next year?
As far as next year will be U.S. Congress.
Okay.
So that won't impact it. It may have a very minor, slight chance of where your voting place might be,
okay,
depending upon how much adjustment.
And then locally, 2024?
2023, clearly it will impact them.
Okay. So oh, that's right, thanks. I'm in 2021.
Virginia's a little unusual in that we have these off-year
Yeah.
elections. We, and I think New Jersey are the only two states that have elections like this in the odd years. We elect our governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, 2021, 23, 25, and so on. And for the federal election, what you do is you look at the population of the state and you say we have 9 representatives in Congress, So if the population is 9 million and you've got 9 representatives, you want to draw the line so that each representative has 1 million voters in their district. And of course, that's not going to happen. The boundaries are going to be like rivers or highways or that kind of thing. So you may have a little more, a little less, and there is a percentage that is allowed. But what has happened is Mr. Whitman's district has gained population, which probably means somewhere his lines are going to be readjusted to take care of that population gain. That won't affect us. We're going to stay in the first district. But as Mr. Tomlin points out, when the supervisors have to start drawing the lines, there are going to be some folks who the line has been down the middle of the road and now it's going to move that way, and you're going to get some people who used to vote at Callio are going to have to come down to St. Stephen's or that kind of thing. But it will affect us.
And that will be for 2023.
That will be for 2023.
And obviously, the process should be starting soon, in my opinion. Now that we've gotten the figures from the census, and they should have gotten what they call the tiger files, where you can then do basically by house.
And Mr. Tomlin also mentioned something else that is going to really, well, I say really, that will slow things down. The 1965 Voting Rights Act established a process known as pre-clearance. The states, basically it was the states of the old Confederacy that had a very long record of essentially preventing black folks from voting by using different processes. And Ms. Christopher talks about how her grandmother had to pay a poll tax. The poll tax prevented, if you didn't have $1.50, if you got a choice between paying $1.50 to feed your family and $1.50 to vote. So the poll tax kept basically poor folks from voting. And so anyway, the Voting Rights Act said in these states, because you have a record of discriminating against certain people, anything you want to do that changes voting must be approved by the Department of Justice. So here in Northumberland County, if we wanted to move a boundary line from one side of the road to the other, that had to go up to the Department of Justice in Washington. In 2013, Shelby County, Alabama sued Attorney General Eric Holder and said, time out. This legislation dates back to 1965 when in fact it was very tough. It was almost impossible for basically African Americans to vote. Things have changed now. Our society has changed, so we would like to have that pre-clearance wiped out. And on a split decision, 5-4, the Supreme Court said no more pre-clearance. The Virginia General Assembly early this year passed a law that establishes pre-clearance here in Virginia. So as Mr. Tomlin says, if we want to move the line from one side of the road to the other, that's got to go up to the Virginia Attorney General, and then the Attorney General has to approve it. And we have had no experience with that, but we expect it's going to slow the process down.
Wow.
To give you an example on the pre-clearance, when the registrar's office was moved, or if the pre-clearance under Section 5 pre-existed, just moving it from where it was in the basement in the courthouse to where it is now, that would have had to been pre-cleared. You had to do all kinds of advertising and give them a chance. So that's something that obviously is quote-unquote minor as that required all those hoops, and we still gonna see what's gonna come from it, but there's still, when you redistricting, you have standards. It's the interpretation, compact, contiguous, and we know contiguous when a rural area with water is always interesting, and the idea of, because if you remember the history of gerrymandering, it's for Eldridge Gerry, who was the governor of Massachusetts, who drew a district in Massachusetts looked like a salamander. Well, you can almost go to every county and you're going to see, either I call it in Northumberland County, we've got the Horseshoe District, District 3, which goes from Bluff Point Road, this area right here is in part of District 3. And you can argue, what's the commonality of interest with Eastville and Kiwanis? They are obviously part of Northumberland County, small county, but the shopping patterns and locations are a little bit different. But to me, compact and contiguous always, and the commonality of interest was the important thing. District 3, the case in Bobby Scott's district, which went from Newport News to a suburb or a district in Richmond, was done to get enough minority voters to have a majority district. And see, that's some of the challenge in the cases, and that's some of the things, because if we wanted to quote unquote lower the percentage of the minority in a district, we could then get charged with regression. And that's, we're going to be stuck with a new process. Is going to be a challenge, not showing how the Attorney General's office is going to look at things.
Right.
Because the current case law is now less for majority-minority and more for minority influence. But how do you do that without being charged with regression? I am unaware of how to do that.
Thank you.
It's going to be a Solomon choice with judges being the ultimate Solomons.
If you don't mind, I'm going to move on because we have about a half an hour and I have a couple of topics I want to make sure we cover. But I know redistricting is really important to a lot of people, so I wanted to make sure that I touched on that. Another thing that we've talked about a lot in the news has been voter fraud and election integrity. What are some measures that we can take to make sure our elections have integrity and or some safeguards? And I'm going to start with Mr. Slater and just work my way down the table on that one.
The term voter fraud or election fraud covers a lot of sins. For example, are there people who are not citizens who are able to register to vote? That's fraudulent. You hear about ballot harvesting. We mentioned absentee ballots that we can put in the mail out to you. When a registered voter applies for an absentee ballot, we mail it to their registered address, and we assume that that voter is going to get it and fill it out and mail it back. There is a fraudulent action known as ballot harvesting. There have been some instances where folks got the absentee ballots that were issued to other people and voted those ballots. There is another problem with misrepresentation. Your grandfather dies just before election, and so you go in and vote, and then maybe you or your son or somebody else in the family goes in and tries to use your grandfather's ID to vote. So there's misrepresentation. There is people who are not eligible to vote, convicted felons, non-citizens who try to register to vote. There is a little bit of fraud associated with absentee voting. The best source that I can cite for serious research into voter fraud is the Brennan, B-R-E-N-N-A, and the Brennan Center for Justice, named after Supreme Court Justice William Brennan. They have done extensive research by going to state attorneys general and then down to the local levels to see prosecution. And on the broad scale, between 2000 and 2014, if you look at every election in this country, there was something like 3 billion votes cast. For that same period, there was a little over 400 cases actually brought to trial of some form of voter fraud. So 400 proven absolute cases out of 3 billion votes cast is a tiny, tiny percentage. The question then is, any system that we establish, somebody can game the system. The question is, does it have enough impact to sway the election? And so far, the answer is no. There have been some circumstances where elections had to be reheld. down in the 6th District of North Carolina, a rural district, a lot of older folks. There was a gentleman down there who was well known. He was going around to older folks and saying, hey, I see you've got this absentee ballot, let me help you with it. And what happened was when these absentee ballots started arriving, the registrar noted that you had ballots coming in from all over the county, but they had the same witness signature. And turned that over to North Carolina State Police, who determined that this guy was in fact taking people from folks, ballots from folks, and saying, oh, I'll take care of this for you. And he was actually marking the ballots. They reran that election. So you do have some cases like that.
After the guy was in jail, I know.
I believe so. He was in trial or something. Another thing that happens is non-citizens. When you register to vote, you do not go over and vote the next day. Your application is run through several different state and federal citizenship databases. We check with Immigration and Naturalization. They look at people who become naturalized citizens. You get a list of those and you say, wait a minute, these people were naturalized on January the 15th. But this guy filled out an application to vote back in December. He's not eligible to vote, although he is a citizen now. So then you've got to, again, turn that over to the state police for investigation. So is voter fraud a real thing? Yes, it is a real thing. It is in the news a lot, but when you drill down to individual cases, you find that it's such a tiny, tiny percentage of the actual voting that it's extremely rare that it has any impact on the outcome of elections.
Yeah, just to reemphasize that.
Oh, go ahead, Denzel.
Just to reemphasize that, I looked into the Brennan Center for some research I had to do for school, and you're more likely to be struck by lightning than it is for someone to commit voter fraud. Election integrity and voter fraud in recent years have been terms raised by people who believe the 2020 election was stolen, and unequivocally it was not. Representatives from both parties, the Secretary of State of Georgia said that the election they had there, the special election and the presidential election, was the safest election they've ever had in history. The Attorney General for President Trump during the election said the election we had in 2020 was the most secure election we've had in the history of the United States of America. So the election integrity and voter fraud have been terms that have been talked about, but only for nefarious reasons in recent years, at least in this past year. It's nothing that has dramatically affected our elections. As the research has shown, you can go to the Brennan Center yourself and see, and it's nothing that we can expect in the future, even as we have had more mail-in ballots. And in last election, we had the most mail-in ballots we've ever had and the most absentee voting we've ever had in the history of the country. And we had the safest election in United States history, according to the Attorney General, according to secretaries of states from Republican and Democratic states. So I understand that people are concerned about voter fraud and election fraud, but I suggest that you read into the headlines that you see, not just read the headlines, and actually see that voter fraud and election integrity is something that, because we live in such a great country, because we have people who sit on the electoral board like Mr. Slater, and counties all across this country who work very hard to run our elections. One of our privileges in living in America is that we can trust our elections. And in many countries, they cannot trust their elections because voter fraud, election fraud, and other things are so prevalent. But in America, we've had the safest election in history this last year. I imagine we'll continue to only be better as years go on.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt?
As a new member of the County Electoral Board, I am absolutely impressed with the security and safety measures that are taken on getting the voting machines prepared for election days. It's a lengthy process, It's involved. The board attends as a whole to get the machines ready, so there's at least 3 sets of eyes on what's going on and the process, and usually the registrar is there, Kathy Davenport, so that's 4 sets of eyes, and it's not that we don't trust each other, but believe me, we watch each other and what's going on, and there's a specific checklist that has gone through and how the machines are set up, and I can speak for this county anyway, there's absolutely no hanky-panky. It's a great process, and I am absolutely impressed with the verification of all the machines and how everything happens down here. Can't speak for other places because I haven't done it in other places, but this county can be assured that the voting machines are absolutely squared away, and there's no messing around. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no hacking. No messing around at all, and so that's a big part of the voting process, is making sure the machines are set up right and verified and validated, and that happens in this county every year, and this is the expert.
Ms. Christopher.
I'd like to thank the Electoral Board for everything that they do, because I think our board is very honest and very truthful, and honesty and truthfulness is the root of everything that we do, and I'm so thankful to you all for what you do.
First off, I want to again thank the Electoral Board, because my father used to be on it myself, so I have a good idea from a historical point of view. And obviously what they do is make that the operation run very smoothly. I already voted, first day you could. You go in there, you've got to prove who you are. I gave my driver's license. They take that driver's license to make sure I'm 1, registered, and 2, I'm registered didn't make a difference for myself, this wasn't a district-driven race, but they would then check that. So I have to tell them who I am, they'll confirm my name, they'll confirm my address. If you vote illegally in Virginia, that can be a felony, depending upon what you do. So it is very concerned. They double check and triple check all kinds of stuff. And I've sat in there after election to watch the results. They are double checking, triple checking, make sure everything adds up. And I have no questions about the accuracy of any election I've observed or voted in since 1975, because it's taken care of. Yes, there are 2 members of the majority party, the Democrats in this case, and 1. But once they get in there and take that oath, they are taking an oath to the election. And the other thing is, since I deal with courts, people get on that stand, they swear to give an oath. That's a felony in Virginia too. Are we going to do extra checks on people being a witness even? No. As long as you register to vote within the time frames, you're a proper citizen, you're eligible to do it, and you don't vote but 1 time, it's done. I mean, I don't question their results. I've lost 1 election by 12 votes. It was too far, even at 12, to do a recount. I wouldn't have done a recount, because I've seen enough recounts. They don't change enough on small elections. If you're within 1 or 2, that might be something to think about. But they only move generally 1 or 2 on local elections. So it is not showing up and voting. No, you've got to, as Joe said, there is a deadline to register. And if you don't register that day, you can't vote. Now, if you've registered to somehow, you can do a provisional ballot, and they have until 3 or 4 days after the election to confirm that you were properly registered. Somehow they didn't get on the books, because sometimes they close them real quick. But you can, if they feel they are properly registered, they can do a provisional ballot, but they obviously do some explanations for all that. But anytime we know there's books that say you can't murder people. It happens too often. There's unfortunately more murders in Virginia than there are probably legal voting in Virginia. And as Joe said, the prosecutions on illegal voting you can probably count them on 1 hand, well, maybe more, but in some places. So it's, again, if somebody wants to go lie and vote twice in an election, go ahead, you may be convicted of felony, and then you won't vote again.
That's right.
Well, that's being another felony.
That's right. Well, I'm gonna, this question is specifically for you, Mr. Tomlin. So tell us when the Board of Supervisors meets, and can I attend a meeting? And how do I get my concerns voiced to you?
The Board of Supervisors meets regularly the second Thursday of the month at 5:30. We generally have our administrative non-public hearings at 5:30. Any public hearings are at 7 o'clock on. Sometimes it goes on depending on how many cases we have. When I first ran for Board of Supervisors, the board was meeting during the day at 10 o'clock in the morning. Not conducive for people who are working or those who are retired or whatever and want to enjoy their day. So the very first meeting, I moved that we have public hearings at night. And so we're doing generally all our meetings then. The only time we do a little bit earlier is like for special meetings for budget stuff. Sometimes it'll be as soon as 8, 7:30 when the public is, all board meetings are open to the public. At least that meet a very limited criteria for a closed meeting. We have to go into closed meeting just like the school board would. In open meeting, we can discuss and then come back in. If we do any action, it has to be an open public. Now, we do have special meetings, either continued or not, depending upon the circumstances. We're going to have a special meeting Tuesday night at 5:30. All meetings, again, are open to the public. Obviously, citizens can contact the board members, either like Joe said, at the grocery store or wherever on the street. We all have email addresses. They can email it to the board. They can email it to the county administrator who give it to the board. Obviously, at board meetings, they can speak on any public hearings, but we also do have a public comment period after the public hearing so people can speak their mind on anything that might have not have been otherwise addressed on anything else before. And sometimes that's when we find out there's some issues. And any way to get there, obviously with the pandemic, it's obviously allowed us, encouraged us, and forced us to, again, come into the 20th century. We do have means to do it online, assuming you have internet access, which is always a question, as we know. Or you can call in, because if you don't have internet, you can, assuming you have cell phone service too, or whatever. But it's a process you have to either electronically raise your hand and all like that. We encourage and want to have public involvement and input because that's how we know what people are interested in, and they can bring us problems that we're not even aware of ourselves. As Joe said, it could be a pothole. We know how to contact VDOT. If a sign's down, know how to contact VDOT. Or it could be a dog problem. We can let the dog warden, or excuse me, animal control officer, I'm old school, Robert Adams. But if and then there's some issues that people bring to us at the board level, which are not board issues. They could be a state agency issue, could be a total state issue, or it could be a federal issue. We could then assist them in referring them to the or we could send letters or resolutions, things of those natures. But it's any way people can get in touch with the board and include showing up. Now, obviously budget hearings, school board budgets, they all have to be public hearings. Anytime we amend our budgets and it's over a certain amount, we have to have a public hearing like with this, either the CARES Act or the American Rescue Plan. We had to have public hearings just to add money that we got from somebody else in there.
That's the same way with the school board. We had a lot of additional emails and calls, as you know, this past year. I think of a couple. I know one Sunday afternoon, a mother called me. She was so upset. And she said, you know, I just don't know what to do now. I've had the computer person come to check and this and that and the other, and you know, we just have such a problem. There were 3 of them in their household who were trying to get on their computers at the same time. And she gave me the example of her son who was taking algebra in the 6th grade. She said time he got the problem presented, the teacher had gone on to the next problem. He was so slow. And so what I did, I called the superintendent that afternoon and I said, you know, we've got a problem. So the next day she met with the principal of the school and we came up with a solution so that child wouldn't have that problem anymore. Another problem I think that, which I got a lot of calls on and emails on and all, was the younger children especially, we gave them Chromebooks and, you know, things like that, but those children didn't know how to type. And one mother told me, she says, it's just so frustrating to me. She said, I've just gotten to the point, I type the answer myself, because it's just said, I don't want my child on the computer that many hours a day, and it's just so frustrating, and then he doesn't have time to do his regular other classes, and so we're trying to deal with that, but we're finding out now it is hard to get typing teachers now. I mean, hard. So we're trying to work on that some, to work with that solution, but we haven't got it completely fixed like we want it yet. But it is very important that people know that they can call us, that they can talk to us, and that we will try to make things better for them and correct the problem, whatever it is.
When does the board meet?
The board meets on the 2nd Monday of every month for the regular meeting, and then all during the month for any call meeting.
And can anyone attend the school board meetings?
Yes,
And what time?
it's at 6 o'clock
At the school.
at the high school auditorium.
How do we, besides calling you, are there other ways that we can make our voices heard to the school board?
Oh, yes, you can, of course, you can email us, you can text a lot of the members, you can call the superintendent, you know. She's very open to solve problems and to talk with people, yes. And we want people, if they have problems, we want to know about it, because as Tommy said, we can't solve them until we know it. But please try to solve them.
Do you have a public hearing time during your meeting as well?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you have a public time that people can make comments?
Yes, they sign a sheet as they walk in the door, and then, of course, come on.
Okay.
We don't require people to sign up to speak. If they want to, if they're there in the meeting, or online, or on by phone, they can chime in and we just have.
During the public comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes we just have people make a comment.
Okay. So I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna vote, and then I decide I want to run for office. How do I do that, and how do I get money? We'll start with you, Mr. Conlon.
Well, if, depending upon which office, let's just say you want to run for local office, the Virginia Board, Virginia has the Department of Elections, they changed their name to. They have candidates for local elections. It will tell you a lot of the legal aspects and the do's and don'ts type stuff. That's a good place to start. Because one, you need to find out your requirements to, obviously we're assuming the person is registered. If they're not registered, they got to register. That's a requirement. Number one. Then after that, they want to find out, is it a county-wide office or is it a district office? And one, they want to find out what district they're running in and any requirements. And then you decide whether or not you're dependent. School board elections are nonpartisan. They're not, there's no party nominations on that. They may be endorsed, but they're not nominated. Anything from board of supervisors on the county level to constitutional officers, which are the clerk, the Commonwealth Attorney, the Sheriff, the Commissioner of Revenue, and the Treasurer. They're the Constitution. The reason they're named Constitution is they're named in the Virginia Constitution. They are countywide and they have different requirements. If you're going to run as nonpartisan or as an independent, then you have to get enough registered voters to sign a petition. And for district elections, it has to be 125 ballot signatures. You have John Doe who's not registered, he or she doesn't count. Or through the party process, the parties have nominating process and depending upon their plans, organizations, and how that can do. That's how you get on the ballot. And how you get money, generally, is how you raise it yourself. Now, parties do have varying amounts of funding that they may or may not have to give to candidates. The biggest thing are a lot of local candidates self-funded. And it all depends upon how much you want to spend. You can spend a lot of money. Nobody at local level does TV because we don't want who's going to advertise in the Richmond, DC, or Tidewater area. But you can do radio advertising, which costs money. You can do newspaper advertising, which costs money. You can do mass mailings, which cost money, depending upon what you do. So it all depends upon, door-to-door generally costs nothing but time and gas. But anything more than that has some cost to it. But it's, the biggest thing is, if anybody asks me, I want to run, think about running, one, come up with a reason why you're doing it. So that's why are you running? If you don't have a good answer for why, nobody's going to vote for you. And it doesn't have to, and I always encourage people, don't don't run on the negativity. Run on a positivity. You can basically say something positive, but it's negative, but in a positive way. Say, whatever, you don't want, we obviously have heard in the past, present, and future, mudslinging, negative advertising. It's done all the time, and as we know, a lot of people are turned by it. They want to know, what is your future? What is your vision? If you can't offer that, why does anybody should vote for that? You can argue necessarily about how to get there, but if you can't even have a there to get to, people may not be as interested.
That's right. Are the supervisor elections also bipartisan?
No.
So there is a party
They can't be
affiliation?
nominated yet.
Okay. Ms. Christopher, what about school board? I know he said that they're bipartisan, but how do I run for school board?
All right. First thing I did, I went to Kathy's office and I got my information and I talked to her about it. And then I went around and got my 125 good signatures, and I'll emphasize the word good. For instance, last time when I was going around door to door, I went to this man's house and his dog was barking, and of course he was distracted by that, of course, me there. And he put the date of the next month on it. Well, of course, I'm not supposed to touch what they write in on those lines. So that person's name had to be struck from my accessory date because it was let's say April date, and I was doing it, turned mine in March, but I knew that, but I didn't, I just went on, I didn't touch it. But, and then, it's up to you when you get your signatures to get back and then do what you need to do as far as campaigning, going to door, which is what basically what I did, and talk to people. And as far as spending money, you can spend, I guess, as much as you'd like. I was not a person who spent very much. I just did the legwork a lot myself, and I only purchased 10 signs, and of course that's nothing for people nowadays. But what I would do, and my husband would do, because we don't like signs, seeing them around for so long at the same place. So every week he'd go and move them in somewhere else in my district. And so far it has worked, and those signs. So I lose 1 or 2 a year grass gutters or something else, you know, but you don't have to spend a lot of money. I did not take any money from anybody either time that I have run.
But can you?
Yes, but you gotta fill it out on those forms. Yes.
Mr. Schmidt, how did you become an electoral official? Was that an appointed position?
Well, okay, I'm the Republican, and our county committee asked me if I would assume the position, which was vacant at the time, and my two Democratic colleagues elected me the chairman. I said, thank you, may I have another? But, you know, as has been stated, once we're on that board, we don't belong to a party. Inside that board, we don't belong to a party. We belong to the people of the county, and we're doing their work. We're working for the people of the county. And we don't discuss politics, believe me. There's no messing around. We're all working for one goal, to make sure that the county elections are absolutely squared away.
Mr. Schlater, anything to add?
Well, as Mr. Schmidt has said, Virginia has 133 localities, 95 counties, and the locality is an incorporated city or town. And each locality has a 3-member electoral board. And the party of the governor determines the majority on the board. So when you have a Democratic governor, you have 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, and vice versa when you have a Republican governor. And the local political party nominates the membership. And so Austin was nominated by the County Republican Party, and that nomination goes up to the chief judge, who has to approve it. And then we're sworn in, and we serve 3-year terms. So we are not elected by the people. Our job is to oversee elections and oversee the registrar of voters, who actually does the pick and shovel work. And when I came on the electoral board, I was the only Democrat. There was a Republican governor, and Mr. John Huber and Mr. Jim Michelle were the 2 Republicans. And John had been chairman for some time. And John said the first day I was in there, said, we have a policy that on this electoral board, we do not have split votes. We vote 3-0. So if we disagree on something, we will work it out before we'll have to vote. Because we feel it's important that the electoral board, who is overseeing elections and responsible for the integrity of elections, that we all speak with one voice. And we do. We meet once a month. Our meetings are open to the public. They're not very exciting.
When do you meet?
We meet down at the registrar's office. Typically, it's the 2nd Tuesday of the month. Sometimes that will vary, depending on whether our 3rd member is out deer hunting or fishing. But the 2nd Tuesday of the month at 9:30 is when we're supposed to meet. And then we will have some other meetings as time goes on. For example, when you get up close to the election, we have to have a meeting where we take the ballots and we say, okay, we need to put 1,000 ballots in this precinct and 1,500 in that precinct, and we have to count out the ballots and put them in there and seal them. So although our regular meeting is once a month, we will have special meetings for specific items.
Okay. We're just about out of time, so I'm going to go with Denzel here and have you all go down the line real quick and just, in your own words, tell us why we should show up at the polls November 2nd. Go ahead, Denzel. You're up.
Okay. Oh, well, you should show up at the polls on November 2nd because of a lot of the things we already spoke about. These elections, you'll be electing your House Delegate candidate. Of course, you'll be electing the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, but you'll be electing your House of Delegate candidate as well. You'll also be, depending on what district you live in, you'll be electing your local school board and board of supervisors representatives. So, and like, as we said, it's those local representatives who touch you the most, who touch your life the most. And therefore, if you're voting, you're expressing how you think those representatives should represent you. The other reason is that when you're looking at some of the things that are going on in the country on the federal level, a lot of it has to do with the local level. So as Mr. Slater already mentioned, it's the governor who appoints the majority of your local electoral board. So how you vote in the governor's race and how the governor's race turns out to be will decide the makeup of your local electoral board. For your state delegate and state representatives, a lot of the things they do is they take a lot of the federal funding and the federal policies and figure out how they're going to be implemented on the ground. So if you're paying attention to a lot of the national news and you want to affect that this year and not wait until the midterms next year or not wait until the next presidential election, you should vote in the elections on November 2nd to make sure that you have representatives who represent you. And even if your candidate doesn't win, you at least made your voice heard and you held your representatives accountable by participating in the election, because that matters too. It's a sacred right. People have died for the right to vote, for your right to vote. And you should definitely take advantage of it, because now we don't have to pay $1.50 to cast our ballot.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Schlitter.
And I think, Mr. Smith, I think Austin's experience may be the same as mine. In my almost 30 years in the Army, we lived in Germany, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Japan. And elections, they all have elections. The German elections are kind of similar to ours, but Taiwan and Japan, there are some restrictions. Not everybody can vote. They have restrictions on citizenship and where did your grandparents or great-grandparents come from and that kind of thing. In Japan, there is a whole population of folks whose great-grandparents came to Japan from Korea. They are still not considered Japanese and they can't vote. In this country, you can vote. We struggled with it for the longest time. Women could not vote until 1919. And we've had, as we have seen, one of the results of the Reconstruction era was changes in the laws and the voting requirements in the old Confederate states that basically shut out a lot of people. It shut out mainly African Americans. The 1902 or 06, I forget when it was, the Virginia Constitution of that year is known as the Jim Crow Constitution. And not only did it basically kill off the number of African Americans who were able to vote, because of some literacy requirements, there was something like 15,000 white people who were knocked out of voting because they were over in the valley and down in coal country and couldn't read. So we have here something that's very precious. We can vote. There are very few limitations on who can vote in this country. And if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And so I would encourage people to get involved, figure out who the candidates are, what they stand for. You decide which one you want to vote. You determine when you're going to vote. We in Virginia have made it easy to vote with this 45 days of early voting, and something like, I think it's 38 states have early voting. There's no excuse to not vote, so do it.
I look on it as a civic duty. If you're going to participate in the participatory democracy we have now, participate. Bottom line, go out there and make your voice heard, and be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. If you don't vote, you can't complain.
I vote also because I like my opinion put in the mix also. And also thinking and going back to my grandmother, what she said, I remember talking about when she first went to vote, could vote, because they said women couldn't vote in the early times. She said, I saved my egg money for I don't know how long, I saved a certain percentage of my ag money, so I'd have that money, so I could vote. So, I mean, if she did that and gave that much of her time, then it would be terrible as far as I'm concerned if I didn't vote.
Mr. Thomas?
Give me an example about women not voting. My grandmother, who was married to my grandfather, who was the sheriff, she never even voted for him as sheriff. But when I ran for Commonwealth Attorney, it didn't win. She registered and voted for me.
That's cool.
Yeah. But Joe and Austin served this country so we could have the right to vote. We had men and women died in Afghanistan and Iraq so they could vote. You had people dipping their hand in a pen, in a bank, and coming up with a blue finger. They voted. And that was actually a little bit dangerous for them to do so. And here, we have so many different ways to vote. In District 2, you're going to have a contested school board race. At the local level, that is the only contested race. But we have contested governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and House of Delegates. Obviously, those three can have a bearing. There are three different races. They're not running either one as a ticket. And obviously, House of Delegates, right now, the Democrats control the House of Delegates by finding 5 or 6 seats. If they flip, then it could flip over to the Republicans have it. So there is a reason to vote on that. But really, you got to find a reason not to vote. And I don't think you can find it.
I remember Ms. Boland, his grandmother, being so happy and telling all of us how she voted for the first time and she voted for Tommy. I remember her saying that many times. Yeah.
You know, if you're gonna take the benefits that this country provides,
Correct.
then you gotta step up and pay your dues.
That's right.
And if you don't, I don't wanna hear about it. You may as well go somewhere else to live if you're not gonna be part of it.
I think most of us in here today, I was in school back when we still had chalkboards. And the teachers wrote on the chalkboard, you had to take the eraser, and then every Friday afternoon, 2 or 3 of us boys would get the erasers and go out and beat all the dust off and have eraser fights.
You had to watch the board too, Joe.
That's right.
That's right.
And I had to watch it. I recall very clearly, and will never forget, my 9th grade civics class was taught by Ms. Elsie Mae Peters. Ms. Elsie Mae Peters was the term we used then was an old maid, but she lived to teach civics. And I don't know if we have civics classes anymore. I know we teach government, and I assume it's kind of the same thing. But you did not get out of Ms. Elsie Mae Peters' civics class unless you knew what the Bill of Rights was about, what each of those amendments was, and how it affected you, and how the terms of office were, how long did the representatives and the senators serve, and the same thing in the state and local. She took us down to the Knoxville City Council meetings, and we watched the City Council meeting. And then we were required to go every so often and write a report on it. And when you have something like that drilled into you when you're in the 9th grade, you don't forget it.
That's right. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming today and all of you for sharing with us your thoughts on why voting is so important. And I will see you all on November 2nd on Election Day.
Well, we'll see you again on September the 30th.
That's right, that's right.
Okay.
Won't see me on the election day. I already voted.
That's right, you already voted, that's right.
And us state employees have that day off.
Bye, Denzel.